The CDC eviction moratorium came to an end at the end of August, and many expected courts to become flooded with landlords evicting tenants. Has that happened locally? Have renters managed to pay the back rent due when the moratorium ended? We'll talk to property managers, the Legal Aid Society, and the Evansville Housing Authority to find out. NewsMakers, presented by WNIN and the Evansville Courier and Press, is up next. A year ago, in September of 2020, the CDC first issued an eviction moratorium to help contain the spread of COVID-19. Before and during the moratorium, Indiana has been leading the country on the number of evictions filed since March 15, 2020, according to data from Princeton University's Eviction Lab. The federal moratorium on evictions ended on August 26th, and while there has been a surge of eviction filings statewide since the moratorium was lifted, this hasn't happened in Vanderburgh County. I'm joined by Sarah Lesh, local government reporter at the Evansville Courier and Press, to discuss some of the local numbers. Sarah, welcome.
Hi.
First time on local TV?
It is.
Are you nervous?
Not really.
I'm not judging. This is a safe space. If you're nervous, it's okay. I know I was nervous the first time I came on this show. I was hardly the polished professional TV personality that I am now.
Are you, though?
It gets easier.
Seems pretty easy already.
I think we're good. Let's move on to our program.
Let's.
Sarah, people expected more than what we've seen. Some people thought that the eviction moratorium being lifted would turn courts into highly public battlegrounds where tenants, often representing themselves, would, beg and plead with judges and landlords to not cast them out of their houses. But we really haven't seen that in Vanderburgh County. What are your thoughts? Why do you think that is?
I know that housing officials elsewhere have said that they're reaching out to landlords in an attempt to reduce those impending numbers of evictions and encouraging anyone who may be at risk of eviction to apply for some sort of assistance programs through a local housing authority or something of that nature. The city of Evansville has allocated more than $415,000 to local organizations like Aurora and Catholic Charities to help residents with rent and utilities. So those sorts of funds may be helping keep people out of courts. And anyone seeking those funds has to make an attempt to get state assistance prior through Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority. So if they don't qualify for the state program, or if the state program can't help them enough, if they owe over $7,000 in rent from a state program, can only give them $5,000, then they can apply for city funds, but they can't get assistance from both programs. So things like that, local assistance and state assistance, may be helping keep people out of the courts.
Well, according to the Eviction Lab, my numbers here tell me yesterday there had been 131 eviction filings in the county in the past 4 weeks. And I know people care about Marion County, and the corresponding number for Marion, where a lot of the action is taking place, is 1,061. So they may have 5 times as many people as Vanderburgh County, but 8 times as many evictions. Mm-hmm. Hopefully our experts here today will help give us a little more context on this still. We're now joined by Mary Mull and Karen Woods of Evansville Homes for Rent to find out how the moratorium has impacted property management. Karen, Mary, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us, what changes have you noticed? The typical eviction rate lower or higher before the pandemic?
I'll be glad to lead off with that. We, as a company, Evansville Homes for Rent, have always had a more conservative philosophy, if you want to call it, with evictions compared to maybe other property management companies in Evansville. We try as much as we can to keep those tenants housed so that they have adequate housing, as well as keep that cost down for the property owners. Because when you do evict, there's also certain costs that are imposed to the property owner. Not only are you losing rent, but you're also having to repaint the homes, recarpet homes, take a lot of miscellaneous stuff to the dump. So there's all kinds of hidden factors that maybe most people aren't aware of. So when we take on a property, we usually interview our property owners and make sure that we coincide with the same philosophy as they do. And so our cost overall, or our numbers overall for evictions have always been pretty low compared to others, maybe locally. Karen did some numbers back from 2019, which was pre-pandemic, and I'll let Karen expand a little bit more on that and compare what our numbers are or have been since the pandemic, so you can get a better idea.
Okay. So it looks like in 2019, and we manage approximately 650 doors, okay, just to kind of put it into perspective. In 2019, we were averaging maybe 3 evictions a month that were completed evictions. In 2020, and after the pandemic started, we were about the same, averaging 3 to 4 evictions a month. And then, of course, it dropped off through April, towards the end of August. And then we were back on track for just a short period of time. But in 2021, our evictions have been very low, and that's because of the availability of state funding or federal funding that is routed through the state. So we always encourage all of our tenants to apply for federal funding by going to indianahousingnow.org, and it has really helped a lot of people to get through it.
And I know during the moratorium, can you talk a little bit about if that covered all cases of eviction, or were there still areas such as damage to a home or something like that where an eviction could still move forward?
Actually, we could have still filed an eviction for non-payment of rent during the moratorium. It was if the tenant showed up to court and had filled out a declaration page that said that they have filed for assistance due to COVID, then the judge would not grant the eviction. But again, the primary reason we would have filed an eviction during COVID was just for lack of communication. If a tenant fails to communicate to us, and we don't even know if they're in the property at some point if they're not communicating anymore. So that's our only recourse. But they could show up to court. I mean, we did very few evictions during COVID, but it was still possible.
Did you have tenants arguing, well, I didn't know about this declaration?
No. Never.
It never got to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Karen.
Sorry, they did have a representative outside of the court, outside of the courtroom, that was there available to help them with the declaration page or help them to get assistance. Okay. But we always, if we were in communication with them, we would always talk to them about the assistance prior to eviction.
Well, nobody really has to ask whether an eviction moratorium puts financial stress on landlords. But what is the nature of that stress? What do most of them argue that they use this money for?
Maintenance. There's a lot of maintenance involved with properties. Pay us, the property managers. So, if they don't receive rents, 1 month, most property owners are going to be able to absorb that. But when you get into 2 to 3 months of non-payment of rent, that really puts a financial burden on a lot of property owners.
The other side of that too is some of the properties, like multi-complex properties such as apartments, the water's included a lot of times in the rent, and and in some cases we have some properties where the gas and electric are included too. That's all an extra cost to the owner, and if that doesn't get paid, I mean, that, as you can see what we've had experienced locally on other situations, it can really, really cause a detrimental impact down the road.
And I know you mentioned your 2021 numbers haven't seen any major increases or anything like that. With the moratorium having ended, do you feel that's imminent, or what's kind of the trend that you're seeing right now?
Not from our company, I do not. I mean, like I said, we've been pretty consistent across the board, and from what I understand, there is close to $50 billion of federal funding available for to help tenants stay in their home, and I think only $5 billion of that has been used. So there's still a lot of money out there for people to get assistance. So we're going to continue to try to encourage our tenants to seek that funding and try to keep them in their homes.
Did the moratorium affect how you process potential tenants?
That's another good question. We really, with the pandemic, our availability of houses in general to rent out has subsided tremendously, don't you think, Karen? Mm-hmm. So if there is a property available, at some points we can have up to 30 properties available on our website to rent, and that's before COVID. Now we are lucky to have 5. So the competition to get those properties has raised, and in some ways it's made it more challenging to get a rental property, but at the same time it was so unforeseen how this was really going to impact things, but there's hardly any movement at all for the tenants that are there in the properties.
And I know we talked about how you guys handled things during the moratorium. If another were to be enacted, do you have anything that you'd do differently, or any other ways you'd handle it?
I don't think so. Just continue to use the resources that the government's given us, I think, and stay educated on what we can do. We also try to partner with local agencies like Aurora, VOA. You know, we try to work with a lot of people.
Well, Karen, Mary, thank you for joining us on NewsMakers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're now joined by Garvin Sen of the Legal Aid Society of Evansville and Rick Moore, Executive Director of the Evansville Housing Authority, to discuss the impacts of the eviction moratorium and its end on local tenants. Gentlemen, welcome to NewsMakers. Thank you for coming. Garvin, what is your observation of eviction trends in Vanderburgh County from your point of view before and after the eviction moratorium?
Well, I think what we saw was that during the moratorium, numbers of evictions, orders that were actually issued in our little county were down significantly. There was about 40% fewer households that were evicted. And since the end of the moratorium, it's only been a couple of weeks, so it's really hard to say. I've seen some reporting measures that were done by another outfit, an outfit called Legal Services Corporation, that suggest, a 400% increase in Warwick County. But here in Vanderburgh County, we haven't seen anything like that. I guess that's just because we're so awesome in Vanderburgh County.
Well, you were kind of thinking it might be worse. You correct me if I'm wrong, you had visions of people lining outside your office.
Absolutely. And I think, again, from what I've seen, in parts of the state that is true. We've just been kind of lucky in Vandenberg County. And again, that's because we're so lost.
Point well taken.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned the decrease during the moratorium, so
Sure.
would you talk a little bit about, do you feel if that had a significant impact on renters here?
Well, absolutely, because the moratorium preserved tenancies. Okay, it preserved tenancies and made sure that folks, had a place to wash their hands frequently during, the public health emergency, and that folks weren't doubled up in shelters or doubled up with families in crowding conditions. And it made sure that babies had places to sleep. So I'm all for that. I think it was a good thing in that sense.
Well, Rick, the federal moratorium protected tenants from eviction, but they still owe their rent. Locally, what assistance programs are available for tenants who are facing eviction, and how do people find out about these programs?
Yeah, we were sort of unique because in our program, assisted housing, our rents are adjusted to families' income. So if they lost income, their rent went down. And we actually had some families that paid no rent. In other cases where they still got behind in their rent, we entered into repayment agreements with them. So at this point, we have no one filed for eviction for strictly non-payment of rent. Now, there may be some other things, lease issues, but strictly non-payment of rent, we have no families right now that are filed. And the ones that got behind in their rents, we've entered into repayment agreements. Some of our families also have accessed the rental assistance program through the state. And I think we've received somewhere around $30,000 worth of payments on behalf of the families that have applied for that. And we help them apply for that.
And talking with that application process for renters, how do you feel the ease and being able to understand and work through that is for just an average renter?
In terms of the rental assistance?
Yes, through the programs that are available.
Well, it's tough because some of them don't access it easily. And so we have people that will help them through. Our managers help them through. We have a resident coordinator that works with families that help them also.
Well, Garvin, if the eviction process has already begun, what legal assistance is available for tenants?
Well, I mean, locally, again, because we're so awesome, we have both free lawyers available for low-income residents that serve from my agency, which is called Legal Aid, and there's another agency in town, it's called Legal Services, that have lawyers that can advise tenants, have lawyers that can go to court and assist tenants with their legal proceedings in an eviction case and defend tenancies, hopefully. During the moratorium, the moratorium was a big change because traditionally a tenant that's behind on rent is really not much of a defense that a lawyer can use to preserve that tenancy. If the landlord says, hey, you're behind on rent, and I'm taking you to court, and I'm going to ask the judge to order you out. There's not much a tricky lawyer could do, but during the moratorium that was changed. If a tenant could make, the requisite showing that they didn't have a high income, that they were experiencing a loss of income due to either a job loss or something that happened during the pandemic, high medical bills was another reason. And that the tenant was trying to make use of all the sources of rent assistance so they could at least make periodic payments to their landlords. If they could show those things, just being behind on rent wasn't grounds enough to terminate the tenancy. And so that was good.
Well, how many lawyers do these two agencies have?
Oh, I can't speak for legal services. But legal services has a presence throughout the state of Indiana, unlike my office, Legal Aid, which just works locally here in Vanderburgh County. So I've got 3.5 lawyers in my office. Not a lot of lawyers, but.
And once the court proceedings begin, is there a particular area that you find tenants have the hardest time with? Is there any specific complaints that you get consistently about the court proceedings themselves?
I wouldn't say about the court proceedings themselves. I think it's critically important for tenants, for anybody that gets a summons from the law court, they've got to show up. And so often, tenants that may have and not just tenants, again, it's anybody that gets a summons to go to the law court, they may have a defense, but if they don't show up, they often, miss the opportunity to, say their objection, say their defense. That's got to be the biggest thing. There's a lot of, I think, we talk about misinformation that's out there. There's a lot of, I think, beliefs that tenants hold that aren't quite accurate, and a lot of folks come to court with this expectation that, well, they've got another 30 days before they have to worry about the end of their tenancy, and that's just not always the case.
Rick, do tenants in Indiana have the right to withhold rent if a landlord doesn't address major housing violations?
Well, I'm not an attorney, but you can ask the attorney that question.
No, they don't. Not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But
Not supposed to do that.
I guess that happens. They try that sometimes.
Again, it's it's part of the misunderstanding or misinformation. What is true in other states, other jurisdictions, is not the case in Indiana. You can't withhold rent if you're unhappy with the conditions of your unit. It's not allowed, and it's not a defense when you're being confronted with an eviction complaint.
Rick, what populations are impacted by eviction more than others?
Again, I think it's the private sector, because since we adjust rents with the families, being able to afford, our evictions are not a lot of non-payment. There are other lease violations that come into play when dealing with our families. We have 890 units that we manage and operate, and then we have another almost 1,500 vouchers. Now, those vouchers are with private landlords, and so they take those cases up.
Well, Rick, Garvin, thank you for joining us on NewsMakers.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. The Indiana Supreme Court recently announced an eviction task force would provide recommendations to the court on how to distribute much-needed federal rental assistance quickly and help tenants and landlords resolve their disputes. Here's the head of that task force, Indiana Court of Appeals Judge Robert Alties, with a quick outline of the task force and how it's going to work.
What our goal is primarily is, first of all, is making sure that everyone out there is aware that the resources are available to take care of any issues that they may have. I would encourage those tenants, those landlords who are having problems with tenants paying rent, and the tenants who are having problems paying rent as a result of COVID, to check out our website. You can visit that at courts.in.gov/housing. Once you reach that link, you need to find your county that you are living in, and from that, then start looking at, first of all, whether or not you're eligible for the program, and secondly, then to begin to fill out the paperwork. It's not difficult to fill out, but we need to get people to start doing that. As I said, I'd encourage tenants because that's the easy solution, but I would also encourage landlords to take a look at this. And if they've got clients, tenants who they believe are struggling to meet their rates due to the COVID pandemic, I would suggest they too work together with those tenants because the money is available, it's out there, and if you're qualified, certainly it would be a good solution for all. One of the things that we are doing currently is we are trying to contact as many tenants and landlords as we can. So anyone who has had an eviction filed against them, we are sending them postcards with a link to our website so that they can begin the paperwork. And I can't stress to begin that as soon as possible. Waiting to get to court and say, well, I'm thinking about applying to get some rental assistance is too late. So I would strongly suggest that if you are having issues paying your rent, that you take care of that quickly. I will note that we are gathering information quickly as a task force, and we've been meeting quite routinely. And our first order of business is to get an interim report to the Supreme Court. That is due within 30 days. So we anticipate by October 17th, we will have our interim report. Our final report is due in January.
Thanks to all of our guests for joining us this week, as well as my colleague, Sarah Less, also of the Evansville Courier and Press. Next week, we'll be discussing the labor shortage. It certainly seems to be an employee's market when looking for a job right now. Thanks for joining us for NewsMakers, presented by WNIN and the Evansville Courier and Press.